Hello, everyone, and welcome to another SEJ Marketing Think Tank webinar. Today, we will be talking with Google's Eric Kwan about website security and manual actions. Really looking forward to this webinar, really looking forward to a lot of interesting information. My name is Brent Satoris. I will be moderating, answering questions here and there if it's important, and basically taking your questions and commenting, et cetera, throughout this presentation. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Eric real quick, and I'm just going to let him kind of introduce himself a little bit. And then afterwards, I will go through some housekeeping points so that everybody knows the rules. Eric, if you want to give us a little bit of information about yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Eric Kwan. I'm on the Webmaster Relations team at Google. I spent about 2 years fighting web spam, and then I transitioned over to the Webmaster Relations team because I really wanted to be able to help webmasters, help them understand how to build great content, build great websites. And I've really learned from the best. I've been working with, Matt Cutts, Gary, John. So really excited to be here, really excited to be able to do this presentation again for everyone.
Awesome, and I'm sure everybody's excited to jump in. So let me just run through a couple housekeeping points and then we'll jump right into the presentation. If during the webinar at all you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to say, you are welcome to ask on Twitter using the hashtag SEJThinkTank. It's all one word, SEJThinkTank. And you're also welcome to ask through the webinar. There's a little box at the bottom where you can chat and ask questions and so forth. We'll get those questions, we'll store those questions, and we'll ask them during a Q&A session. There will be a number of polls throughout the webinar. This is an opportunity where we'll pause and let Eric drink a little water, and then I'll ask the poll, and you guys will have an opportunity to kind of participate. And it's very helpful, so we ask that everybody please, participate if you can. After that, we will go and, finish the presentation. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. We'll do our best throughout the entire webinar to link any references or tools or anything that's discussed in the conversation so that you guys have that at your at your discretion and your use. We will also take any links that we post or anything like that, and we will put them in a recap. There will be a full recap of this presentation, this webinar, a full recording, a write-up, all the questions and answers. So you will see that on Search Engine Journal in the next day or two. After the entire webinar is over, if you can do us a favor and just please stick around for a couple minutes. We have a short survey. It really takes less than 5 minutes, and we really do look at the responses that people have to try to improve the way we do these webinars. So without any further delay, let's dive into the webinar. Eric, go ahead.
Great, thanks. So these are the 3 takeaways that we'll have at the end of the session, hopefully that you'll be able to learn. Number 1 is to prioritize web security. Number 2 is common sense, follow the Google Webmaster Guidelines. And number 3, if you don't get a manual action, don't really worry about it. That's not to say, you can go and, do borderline stuff, but we'll really discuss what that means. It's not a catch-all. First off, I want to talk a little bit about web security. So we have a poll question. I'm always very interested to see if anybody's site's been compromised. We've been seeing a lot more compromises lately on sites in really different ways. So if you could just take a couple of seconds to answer this poll question, that'd be really helpful for me to set some context for me as well.
Perfect. And I'm going to launch the poll right now. It's pretty straightforward answers, yes or no. Have you ever been hacked? Yes or no. And we'll give it a little bit of time. Typically, we try to give a minute for everybody to get their answers in. And then once we get a couple more votes in, I'll go ahead and close it, and then I'll show the results. So again, has your site ever been hacked? Yes or no? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, and we'll share the results. And it's pretty, actually, that's a little more close to half and half than I expected. Interesting. The 39% have been hacked. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, I'm kind of switching between screens here because I'm seeing a lot of it's moving my screen around. But yeah, that's interesting. That's actually pretty in line with what we've seen. It's a really bad statistic. So I'm going to dive right into what website hacking is, and kind of give you context on how you can protect yourself and what all this information about website hacking means for you and your website. So there's different types of website compromises. we'll run through these really quickly. Most of you are probably aware of it, but spam is probably the most common. A hacker will come in, try to attack your site really quickly, throw in a couple of links, throw in some content like for Viagra, pharmaceuticals, casino, gambling stuff. This is really bad for your site because users will come in expecting to see, your content, but they might be redirected or something weird happens and they see all this content about like pharmaceutical, pornographic content. So spam is the most common, but it can be pretty damaging to your website. Malware obviously is like directly affecting your users. And so we are always, we warn about malware a lot more strictly. And that's when you see kind of that red interstitial in search warning users that there's malware on your site. If you have malware on your site, that is something that like you have to, all these things you have to address immediately, but malware is something you have to like really worry about and try to figure out where that source is coming from, because that is actually attacking your users at that point. Credit card skimming is something fairly new. It affects e-commerce platforms. Credit card skimming, I think, for me, is personally the most dangerous as a consumer, because that means someone is stealing the credit card information from your consumers. And so if your consumers are going to your website and then they see their content being, their credit card information being stolen, that's like, that's really damaging for your reputation as a business. A lot of e-commerce platforms, if there's some type of vulnerability, people can do kind of sneaky things to redirect users to maybe like a phishing-like page to collect credit card information, or just capture the credit card information as they're typing it into the site. So this is something that you really want to watch for, and it's something that's like fairly new and up and coming. Finally, there's botnets. Botnets are really difficult to detect, but they steal your resources. They're using your resources in order to do things like crack passwords or try to hack other sites. Botnets are something typically that may be difficult to detect, but is something that you also want to pay attention to. So these are, when we're talking about website hacking, these are kind of the things, the four major things, categories that we've seen before. All this is really to say is just to make website security a priority. I think that's like the one piece of advice that I can give you that makes the most sense and is probably going to help you the most about website security. You always have to be thinking about it, because hackers are constantly attacking your site. And I really mean that. You should check your log files. If you look at your log files, you can see some really weird things. Some people do basic things. They'll go into your website and find some type of admin panel and say, oh, this is just a password. Let's try the word admin username and admin password. And if you haven't changed from the default setting, hackers can get into your site. So hackers are always constantly attacking your site, which means you always have to be paying attention. One weak link can break the entire chain. This is especially true of website security. We've seen it in so many ways for large companies, for recent breaches. It's just one thing. You can do 98, 99% of the things right on website security, but that 1 to 2% is what you have to make sure is also secure. Because if you have that one weak link and people get into your site, then they can start undoing all the work that you've done. It doesn't matter that you have 98%, 99% protection. If they can get in, that 1 to 2% can entirely break your entire site. And no one is immune. Even big brands get affected. I don't think I need to reiterate that. We've seen this time and time again with big brands, small brands, everybody is affected. So don't think just because, oh, I'm a smaller site, hackers won't attack me. No, that's not true. Oh, I'm a bigger site. I use all these, I have like really good web developers that they won't affect, like nothing's gonna affect me. That's not true. So you as a website owner, website developer, whoever you are in the chain of making this website, you have to emphasize website security and understand where your risks and liabilities are. So if a site is hacked, it can prevent users from accessing your site. It can redirect them. Worse yet, it can compromise you and your users' data. And then all that boils down into like affecting your brand's reputation. I think those things combined should make you already, understand that you should really care about website security. But I think the thing that people struggle with the most actually is that once their site gets hacked, it's actually very, very difficult to fix. Hackers are constantly trying to keep a hacked site hacked, which means they're going to be doing weird things like cloaking or injecting little files that may look like a good file. That's like, it looks like a normal JavaScript file that you might be running on your site, but just altering it a little bit, changing the name of it, can make it difficult for you to understand like how to properly fix your site. And so we see a lot of people really struggle with fixing their site after it's been hacked. You also have to find the vulnerability, that's probably the hardest part, because you don't know how the hackers got into your site. You don't know how they were compromised. So understanding the vulnerability is the difficult part. And finally, just resecuring that lost data, understanding what data was lost, who you have to notify, things that are going on with, like if you lost any sensitive data in your database, that is just a huge pain. So the best way really is just to prevent your site from getting compromised in the first place. And so here are a couple basic things you can do. So the number one thing that I talked to you about was basically to always think about website security, always prioritize website security. But aside from that, the first thing I would do is sign up for a Google Search Console. We have seen a huge rise in hack sites lately, huge percentages year after year. And we always try to warn webmasters, because it's in the best interest for Google, but it's also for the best interest of our webmasters to make sure that their sites are secure. So whenever we see any type of vulnerability, whenever we see some type of, if your site was hacked, we'll notify you in Search Console. And those are the kind of notifications you want to that you'll want to pay attention to when it comes to website security. Again, keep security at the forefront of your strategy. Talk to everyone that touches your site, develops your site, works with your site, the marketers, the SEOs, even the person who's just overseeing the entire company. Make sure that they understand security is very important. Backing up your site regularly is probably the most effective way of recovering your site when it's been compromised. I don't think enough people do that. If you don't regularly back up your site, start doing that, because it's super important. If your site gets hacked, you can immediately just go to an older backed up version, and then you'll kind of be up and running for that moment. Again, you'll have to go and look at any vulnerabilities that were there that existed in the first place that allowed your site to be breached. And you'll also want to, resecure your data like we just talked about. But backing up your site is super, super important. Keep your software updated. I can't emphasize this enough. Most of the compromises we see are from outdated software, CMS platforms, plugins, the e-commerce platforms. Sign up for those newsletters for any CMS platform, e-commerce platform plugin that you have. And whenever they have an update, if it has anything that has to deal with, security, or they're saying like update now because of some security issue, you have to update like almost immediately, because if it's a known vulnerability to the platform, to the software, it's a known vulnerability to hackers, and they will start scanning your site and start looking at your site to understand if they can get into your site. I know this can be difficult because you have to talk with your people who are invested in your site, because sometimes making updates to the software can break certain plugins if they're not compatible. You really have to talk with people who are all working on your website and make sure that they understand that these updates are super important. I once was working with a software developer and trying to fix their site because it was hacked. And I said, hey, you actually have this really outdated plugin. It's been outdated for, like 3 versions, like almost a year. And the developer, she said, yeah, I know. And I've warned the website owner, like, this is a vulnerability. And we've been hacked like 3 or 4 times in the past year. But the website owner doesn't want to update, because if we update, then that plugin is no longer compatible and we can't use it. I think website security is much, much more important than having a certain plugin or a certain feature. You can find different plugins or different features that'll work. So I know that it's not always within your control as a website developer or someone who manages the website, but make sure that everybody within the chain understands that website security is super important, and why it's important to update and make these changes, even if it may kind of lose a couple of features. And finally, consider investing in security software. There's a lot of great security software out there. If you're not an expert in securing your website, or you think you need just an added layer of protection, A lot of security software is out there that can do a really great job at helping protect your website. I wanted to also talk about HTTPS because it's slightly different from website security. Website security is about not getting your site hacked, whereas HTTPS is about encrypting the information transmission of your website. So HTTPS is a good practice that can help users keep users' data secure. This is the future. HTTPS is really the future. We're urging everybody to move your site to HTTPS, no matter if you do have passwords, credit card information. I mean, if you have credit card information or passwords or anything that you're transmitting, you have to go to HTTPS. We actually show warnings in Chrome. We started doing that a while ago. If your site is transmitting passwords, credit card information, and it's not an HTTPS. So for HTTPS, if you have any limitations, of course, you can limit it to just your passwords or credit card information. But again, try to get your entire site on HTTPS. Cool. We're going to jump into manual actions. I think I have a poll question here. So yeah, take some time to answer this poll question.
Awesome. Have you ever had to help resolve a manual action? Select one of the following, yes or no. Have you ever been involved? I'll say, have you ever been involved in resolving a manual action with Google? And while we're waiting, I mean, I will definitely say that I've started to see a lot more of the warnings for HTTPS popping up. Even in forums where you just simply have passwords, I've seen that start popping up. So it's definitely something where I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, well, it's not going to have a big ranking effect, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. But I think that from a branding perspective, having that little lock and also having not having that interstellar that says this site could be insecure is definitely important. And I think we have enough time, enough people have voted. So I will go ahead and close the poll now and share the results. And 58% no, but 42% have. Not too surprising for this audience, but still it's kind of interesting that many people have been involved in an actual manual action.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experiences, what type of manual action you had to help resolve. I think I have a pretty clear idea of what types of manual actions, but it's always interesting to see what type of interactions people have, because we're always trying to improve that process of notifying webmasters and helping them resolve the issue and helping them through the reconsideration process.
Would you consider a manual action to also be things like the malware warnings or things like that?
I usually categorize those differently. Manual actions for me are typically about, any type of webmaster guidelines violations, and then the security stuff is a little bit separate. But I could see this poll question being a little confusing. So maybe we could clarify that a little bit in the questions or talk with this question. Great. So manual actions is like this really interesting topic because I've worked on the web spam team for a while, and everybody externally thinks this is like super mysterious and like this crazy, like hodgepodge of conspiracy theories, this black box. And I really want to help clarify that because it's really not mysterious. It's pretty straightforward, and I want to make sure everybody understands like what a manual action is, what that means for your site. Like, I think people get a little bit paranoid sometimes about manual action. So I want to clear out some misconceptions and some myths. So manual action is basically an adjustment of a site that is manipulating Google search. We don't want people to be manipulating Google search because that's bad for our users. If people are manipulating how they're ranking, how the Google search engine sees their site, that's bad for our ranking algorithms. That's bad for Google in general. That's bad for the rest of the website ecosystem, for other people who have websites, right? Because we want to rank everybody fairly and get the best information for our users. So manipulative behavior is anything done to trick search engines, deceptive behavior like cloaking, unnatural links, scraping content, and it's also not limited to a specific set of rules. The webmaster guidelines are it's like a good set of information where you should read it, be familiar with it, but that doesn't mean if you can find something that's not in the webmaster guidelines that you can go and do it if it's like manipulative to Google search. We will eventually find that out, and we will start taking manual action on things like that. So what should you do in terms of understanding or preventing or making sure your site isn't hit by manual action is first off, check the webmaster guidelines. Be really familiar. Oops, my light just turned off. Sorry. Man, technical difficulties everywhere. So just check the webmaster guidelines, read through them, understand what they're all about. They're really common sense, and they're built to help webmasters understand, like, these are a really basic set of rules that you should be understanding. Going back to like one of my takeaways, it's don't be overly concerned about manual actions. I don't think you should be building your website and focusing solely on how do I avoid getting a manual action. For the most part, if you're building a good website, if you're building a good website for your users, you're not going to be affected by a manual action. Manual action is reserved for people who are trying to manipulate or trying to do something tricky in order to manipulate the Google search rankings. And so what we want to do is we want to improve ranking by focusing on your users' needs. Really talk to your users. I think one thing that people don't do enough is send surveys on their websites or talk to their users about the ease of using their website, how easy it is to use, what improvements they could make. Because we're trying to focus on bringing sites to users that are most helpful for them. So if you are really listening to your users, make those improvements that your users want. And then your rankings, will get better. The second thing is technical SEO. I've seen so many mistakes, so many really basic mistakes about, bad canonicalization tags, or even just like title tags in the wrong place, or 2 title tags in the head, and people are confused as to why Google's changed their title tag. Technical SEO is so important. Make sure your site is really strong technically, so Google can understand your site properly. So let's talk a little bit about reconsideration requests, because it seems like a lot of you have had to file a reconsideration request. So first off, the reconsideration requests, they're mostly manually reviewed by our team. So there is someone on the other end looking at your reconsideration request and checking to see if anything has changed, making sure that all the all the fixes that you said you made on the website are done. A good reconsideration request documents understanding of the problem and details how the problem was solved. And this is super important for our team because we do see a lot of reconsideration requests every day. And if you're able to document in the reconsideration request the changes that you've made, the updates that have been made, that really helps our team more efficiently understand how you've made your site better and is no longer manipulating Google Webmaster Guidelines. A bad reconsiderations request does something like submit a blank site. I know some people are like, man, I'm so frustrated, I'm just going to start fresh. Just get me out of this manual action. I'm just going to restart my site and just submit a blank site. That's not really helpful. And in fact, most reconsideration requests that have a blank site will go back and say, look, is this a blank site? It doesn't show that you've done anything, you've changed anything. It just seems like you've taken down the site, because we have seen a lot of spammers do this type of action. We'll take down the site, submit a blank site, and then come back and say like, oh, my site's, and then put all the spammy bad content back on. So that is a practice that we're aware of, and that's kind of what we're protecting ourselves against when we don't accept a reconsideration request with a blank site. If you don't detail what was changed, again, that can hurt us, that can slow us down, that can confuse the reconsideration team. So make sure to detail what was changed. And then people who completely tear down a site, like the manual actions are actually very specific in what we're asking about, or what we've identified. If you go and see one manual action, you kind of freak out and say like, oh my gosh, I have to do all these different things for my site now. I have to like tear it down, I have to rebuild it. That's not really the right approach. We want you to focus on the issue at hand. And if you're not aware of what the problem is and you're confused, please get some help at the Webmaster Help Forums. There are a lot of really great top contributors who are experienced webmasters who've seen a lot of manual actions who can help you. I work periodically in forums. There's a lot of Googlers in the forums always looking at these types of requests. And our aim is to help you get out of this manual action and to file a good reconsideration request. Google Plus and Twitter, we're also very active on Google Plus and Twitter. I know some of you are all submitting questions on Twitter right now. And then finally, look towards the Webmaster blog. Sometimes we may send a manual action out because we've seen a new manipulative practice. In those cases, what we'll do is we'll also put a post on the Webmaster blog to notify users that, like, look, there's this new type of manipulative behavior that we're applying manual actions for. You have to go and pay attention to the Webmaster blog, like read this Webmaster blog to help you understand like what that really means. It's a quick way for us to disseminate that information, and eventually we'll build that all into our help center and everything. But sometimes when we see some new manipulative behavior, we want to catch it as soon as possible. But we also at the same time want to help notify our users so they can understand what's going on. Great, so here's some resources. I think they'll be pinged throughout the chat. If you want to take a look, it's our help center up top. The Webmaster Help Forums, there's a short link there for g.co/webmaster help forum, and of course, we're on Twitter. So that's all I have for you today. The 3 takeaways: prioritize web security, follow Webmaster guidelines, and again, don't unnecessarily worry about manual actions. Build your website for your users. Focus on making a great site for your users, the content, and also focus on technical SEOs. You don't have to be like overly concerned about like, is there something wrong with my site?
Really great.
Thanks.
Eric, that was really great. I mean, a lot of really good information there. I think we have quite a bit of time for some Q&A, and I think there's quite a few, I know there's quite a few questions already kind of pouring in. The question is obviously how much can we talk about and how much can we get into, you know, but I think that there's a lot of interesting questions here. I really just want to take a quick moment just to kind of plug our next webinar, and we have one coming up on November 15th. It's going to be same time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and this one will be about combining content and SEO for even bigger wins. And this is with Chris Hart and Christoph Trapp, I'm guessing. Trapp. I don't really know how to say that, but I'm guessing, and I'll probably destroy it. But my last name gets destroyed quite a bit, so I'm used to that. They'll be presenting on the topic, and it's definitely something I think you don't want to miss. There's a lot of discussion about you know, SEO and content and combining the two, and these 2 guys definitely know their stuff. So with that said, I do want to jump into some Q&A. Definitely, if you have questions and you haven't asked them yet, ask them in the system or use the hashtag SEJ Think Tank on Twitter. And right off the bat, we were talking earlier about, you know, securing your site. And, you know, I had a really weird hack once where, as you mentioned, it was less about getting an immediate result and more about getting something embedded. And so I found that it was creating pages, you know, for Viagra and all kinds of other stuff. And so I didn't realize it until somebody said, hey, you know, you're ranking for like a Viagra phrase. And I was like, what? There's nothing about that on my, and then I looked and I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sites. So I actually deleted the site, the pages, fixed it, and then a month later had the same problem because there was, you know, basically a sleeper kind of element to it that was allowing it to kind of get back in. Do you have a sense, I know sometimes it's hard to recommend specifically, but do you have a sense of what services or plugins out there are kind of more popular for protecting your, you know, your site? Or, you know, kind of resolving issues that pop up?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not able to recommend like a specific service. There's a lot of really great services out there. Ones that are specific for a CMS, for example, or for like a specific platform. There's also a lot of resources on the Webmaster Help Forums. We have a whole section dedicated to security issues now. And one of our sections is about specific types of hacks and how to clean up that specific type of hack.
Nice.
And we've done a lot of great research onto understanding how a site is manipulated. So things like your htaccess file, right? Like it usually starts with an htaccess file that points to a rogue JavaScript file or a rogue PHP file, and that PHP file generates a whole bunch of these Viagra pages on your site. And then usually they'll drop in like a little backdoor. So you have to clean up each point of it and then figure out the vulnerability and then figure out, you know, like if there are any of these backdoors still on your site. So the Webmaster Help Center has a couple resources around that we've been trying to beef up. We're identifying more and more types of hacks and understanding how they work. So that's something I'll go through.
So one of the things that was interesting for me is that I actually host on Tiger Tech, and I've always really liked Tiger Tech. And the thing that I actually really liked from my service there was the fact that I didn't know. They were the ones who said, "Hey, by the way, you have these Viagra pages," and they actually cleaned up a lot, and then went in and cleaned it up, fully cleaned it up for me. Is it normal in your experience? Do you think people should expect their server companies to kind of help them? Even if it's not proactively, like retroactively, if you ask your server company, should they help you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We've actually been kind of trying to understand how hosting providers deal with different types of security issues. And so one thing we're recommending for people who are running websites is talk to your hosting provider about how they handle security issues. Because if it happens to your site, having your hosting provider who is very good, very active, willing to help you is like one of the most important things. Some hosting providers will try to upsell you on certain content. And like that actually might be worth it for you if you don't have the time or expertise to fix it. But understanding initially, just when you start working with a hosting provider, how they can help you when it comes to security issues is a really important point in choosing hosting providers. So I'm glad you brought up that point.
So there's quite a few questions in here that are like, how do you get rid of malware? What's the best security stuff? And so forth. And I think you kind of referenced back to the fact that we can, as users, and just to kind of clarify this, as users who might run into an issue, we can come to Google's, Webmaster Forums and say, "Hey, look, I've got this issue, I've got this problem," and there will be resources there to at least point us in the right directions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, the Webmaster Help Forums, we have a lot of experts in security issues in the Webmaster Help Forums. And in fact, that's one of the top issues that we're really paying attention to and trying to figure out like who's coming to the forums and how we can help them deal with security issues. So the Webmaster Help Forums is actually another great resource for everyone.
So I know for a lot of users, it's very scary to get the red interstellar. A lot of people go to their site, they don't get the notification. They just all of a sudden it's like Google saying this site's producing malware. I had that happen to me on one of my sites, and I will say that when I contacted Google through my the Search Console. I was able to resolve the issue, and I had the notification taken away within 12 hours. Which
Mhm.
I thought at the time was like, amazing because I was really nervous about the branding impact that would have. And a lot of companies probably do have concerns about those branding issues. Are you seeing a similar kind of turnaround time for people when they contact Google? Is it typically within a day or so, or does it depend really on the situation?
Yeah, it totally depends on the situation. I will say that we're trying to improve that part of it because we understand that these security issues, like they're very concerning for a website because it can drive away users. So we are trying to be way more responsive. We're trying to, have a quick turnaround time and really help people fix these issues as soon as possible because it's in everybody's best interest to do that. So it totally depends, and I understand that that red interstitial can be scary, but we will notify you in Webmaster in Search Console when any type of those security issues happen, and in Search Console we'll give you kind of like a line of code that you should be paying attention to or a specific page, so you can track down the issue more easily. And again, we're trying to expand that messaging. We're trying to improve that messaging. So if anybody has like any suggestions for us about how we can improve that messaging or how we can build better documentation for you when it comes to these types of security issues, that's something that's always welcome, and we'd love to kind of build into our next set of documentation.
Perfect. Kind of moving on into some of the manual penalty area. I'm just going to kind of run through some of these questions, and we'll decide how I mean, you'll have to decide how you
Sure.
answer some of these. Can Google offer more specific details for a structured data penalty? Google guidelines are so extensive. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack at times.
Yeah, the structured data manual actions, they're something kind of new that we're dealing with. The way that people manipulate structured data is fairly creative at times. Um, so I definitely will take that feedback back to the team because I do see in the forums that people are confused sometimes about these types of issues. So I'll bring that feedback to the team to see if we can be more specific and tight about our messaging around structured data, because that's something that I do want us to improve on. What I will say is if you have something in terms of structured data and you're really confused about it, again, the Webmaster Help Forums is probably the best place to get like a more immediate answer. Again, because not only are our top contributors who are really experienced webmasters helping out in there and like, looking at questions and answering questions, but also Googlers are in there trying to get feedback and understand what people are, how things are changing for users or what they're struggling with in terms of things like manual actions for structured data.
Another question, an interesting question. How many people are working at Google manually reviewing links?
Sorry, my light went out. Give me a
Ah,
second.
that's all right.
And these little motion sensors are not very kind.
They want to know how
Um,
many people you have there looking at reviewing links, manually reviewing links.
yeah, I mean it varies. There's our team, we're a global team and we're always growing. There's not any specific numbers that I can give, and I don't know if like giving you specific numbers will even really help you in improving your website. I think that's something that people are always interested in, but um,
Trying to slip something in just to see if they can get some information. Do you feel like what do you feel like is the general attitude at Google in the I mean you guys it's the same like there's a police mentality, right? At a certain point as a police officer you see everything bad and everything that people do. Do you feel that like how are you guys balancing the viewpoint on manual reviews? And if I can add one more twist to that, how often do people get caught into that environment when they really have done nothing wrong? Um,
um, so first off, we are very, very cognizant about any false positives. Like we try to rectify those immediately. We train our team a lot extensively to, understand what spam is and what spam isn't, what manipulating guidelines are and what manipulating guidelines aren't. So we are really cognizant that like this is a very serious thing, and we take all these actions very seriously. It's not we don't go around willy-nilly being like, this looks sort of bad. Let's just go ahead with this. We have extensive reviews and we have extensive training. When I first started on the team, I didn't know too much about manual actions, and it took me months to ramp up to really understand, how people are manipulating websites. So, like, I'm a personal example of someone that came in, didn't know too much about it, but like after a lot of working and learning from some of the best in the industry, about how people manipulating guidelines, I think I'm like really good at identifying what is manipulating Google search results and what isn't. Sorry, I forgot the first part of the question.
Oh, I was just saying, I think we were just saying that, how's the attitude in general? I mean, is it
Oh,
kind of like everybody's guilty and, you're just all trying to, squeeze out of it, or is there a kind of an even, mentality as far as like, let's actually have a conversation and figure this out?
right. Anytime there's some type of issue that seems controversial or we're not too sure, we have a discussion about it. Our team has discussions about it. We have people that can, really make judgment calls and really understand the problem. We don't take any problem and say like, oh, this looks like it might be bad. Let's just go ahead and like roll with it, right? And I'm actually a perfect example of someone who, I started on the web spam team, and I saw a lot of webmasters actually getting caught up in manual actions without fully understanding why. And it might be because they're getting bad advice somewhere on the web. They hired someone, like some of these marketers sometimes will be really, really sneaky and they'll say like, oh, I can get you to rank number one, give me some money. They'll do it, but they'll do it in a bad way and then they'll just run away, right? And so I started seeing all these people get caught up in these types of bad situations. And that's why I transitioned to this webmaster relations team to help people understand exactly how to build good websites. Because I think that's information that sometimes can get disseminated very quickly, like, oh, this technique totally works. This is a good technique. It's safe. It's not a violation of webmaster guidelines. And I think it's really our job at Google to help people understand, like, no, there's like really good ways to build a great website. So that's kind of my attitude, and I think that's most of the attitudes of the team. I know people from the web spam team still come to people from the webmaster relations group and say like, hey, we're seeing this new behavior and we actually want to help webmasters understand why this behavior is bad. So can we put out a blog post? Can we go into the forums to understand if that problem is happening for a lot of people? Can we build new help center documentation? Can we build new messaging? And so that's actually a huge part of fighting web spam, not just identifying the people who are manipulating results, but also trying to help people understand that the way that you're doing things is wrong, and that you need to kind of like change or shift your strategy because it's considered a violation of webmaster guidelines.
Just a real quick question, jumping back to web hosting and stuff. Somebody asked how often they should back up their site, and is there a way to do this automatically? I know with my host, they do a daily backup, and I think it lasts for like 3 months and stuff. So I have a pretty, it's automatically just built in. And I think a lot of web hosts have that. So you definitely could ask. But do you know if there's any plugins or what a recommended time period for backing up is?
Um, if you could back up every second of every minute, like every millisecond, that would be the most ideal, but that's nearly impossible, right? I mean, I think a daily backup sounds great. It really is about like if something happens to your website, or if you lose data, or if your site gets compromised, being able to roll back to a version that is still a good version of your website is super important.
But
So
but if somebody has like a site where they're like it's more like almost like one of these 5-page websites where they're just a company that's like and it hasn't changed in a year. I mean, essentially they could get away with doing one a little less often.
exactly, yeah, exactly. Like if you don't have a lot of content changing on your site, I mean, if you're not changing anything within a year, having a backup once a year seems totally reasonable.
Yeah.
It's kind of the strategy of your own website and how you decide to run that part of it. But my emphasis on backing up websites was really about, in case there is some type of security breach, being able to get your website up and running as soon as possible is having a good backup to go back to.
So this kind of jumps into my comment about seeing some of the HTTPS notices even on sites that are not necessarily e-commerce. There's another question here saying, I'm seeing warnings with forms. I've received notices for sites pages which don't accept any input from users other than a search box. Does on-site search alone have the ability to negatively impact the site's presentation on Chrome or with Google rankings based on a scenario like that?
That's something that I'll have to check with the HTTPS team about. If you are seeing kind of these things where they're not collecting any type of sensitive data, please post in the webmaster help forums, because HTTPS unfortunately is not my expertise, but I do work with people who are constantly trying to make sure that the sites that they're trying to notify, like there's unsafe content or unsafe transmission of content here. We want to be very accurate about that, those types of warnings. So please post in the webmaster help forums. Um, uh, if you could, yeah, if you post in the webmaster help forums, I'll be looking out for it. Or shoot us a message on G Plus or Twitter at Google WMC, and I'll try to check it out and see what type of and I'll check with the team to see like what type of notifications they're sending at this point.
Perfect. Another question about HTTPS. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion. Actually, some tests that initially had come out with HTTPS. It was like after I swapped, I actually lowered in ranking. So the question comes in here: can switching to HTTPS lower my website ranking?
The ranking question is always super difficult for me without actually looking at a website and being able to, assess it. Um, it could just be coincidence. I mean, we're making changes to our algorithms all the time. So it doesn't necessarily like, I think that's what's really difficult sometimes about making these calls, because not every change you make on your site is correlated to something. You may, improve in ranking because you added the word a 20 times on your website, but that's not necessarily why. Maybe we just made an algorithm change that's, saw that some type of different value for your site. We have heard about some people saying like HTTPS ranking is causing my site to rank lower, and we haven't really seen that happen because of HTTPS. It could be because the site is still changing. Of course, like HTTPS is kind of like a site migration, so it could be the site is just stabilizing itself. It could be that there was some other change that was made. But generally, I mean, HTTPS is a positive signal for the Google search rankings. Again, if there's like a specific question about this for a specific site, try to find us on the forums or at Google WMC again, and I'll kind of look. I'll be keeping my eye out for a couple of those questions on our Twitter feed or in the Webmaster Help forums over the next couple of days, just so I can provide you kind of a better answer, because I know that's it's not the greatest answer for you right now.
Yeah, and I would also reiterate reaching out to you guys is a really great way. I mean, even you don't have to necessarily have an in to get an answer to your question. I mean, Gary, I remember when we first started the HTTPS shifts, Gary and John were really, pushing, people to start doing that. And so they were personally responding to anybody who had these kind of questions. So hitting people up on Twitter or the WMC, sections of the forums and in those contact ways are a great way to get your answers. So if you have specific questions like that, definitely follow up with that.
Yep.
How are you dealing with large quantities of do follow links coming in from a footer and header? Wow, haven't seen that question in a while.
Large quantities of do follow links from headers and footers.
Do you guys basically ignore header and footer at this point?
That's man, y'all are throwing some really interesting questions my way. The linking question is I think it's a more philosophical question, and it's not about what links you're putting where. It's like, do you need those links there? Are those header and footer links, are they helpful to your users? Are they doing something? If they're not, and they're not doing anything for users, we'll most likely ignore it. If we see some type of like weird manipulative behavior where you're trying to build link chains from your site to other sites to like 100 billion other sites, that's something that's like grounds for manual action, right? That's a violation of World Webmaster Guidelines. So philosophically, links are something that should help your users. Like, you should be linking in your headers and footers if you think that it'll help your users discover content. Don't worry too much about what Google's thinking about them,
This is a really interesting question. An individual has an old website that received a manual action for unnatural link building about 4 years ago. After a year and a half, the manual action just disappeared in the actual console. It just was no longer there. They have abandoned the website. They never bothered to clean it up, and they never put in a reconsideration request. But they're curious, since the manual action notification disappeared, does that mean that the manual action is gone?
Yeah, so if the manual action is no longer in Search Console, that means the manual action is no longer there. But just be aware, some of our manual actions, they tend to expire. They can expire sometimes. But that doesn't mean that like your site's in the clear. Like, if we see that the site is ranking unnaturally, or we see that like something's happening again with the site, the manual action will come back. So you still have to work on that manual action. It doesn't mean you're in the clear. It just means the manual action is no longer applied on that site.
Another question about the HTTPS warnings. When is it expected for these type of warnings to kind of roll out across all of Chrome, like for all types of websites? And how important is HTTPS actually for security?
So the first question, again, I don't work with the HTTPS team, so that would be a better question for the Webmaster Help forums, or tag us on at Google WMC, and I can get an answer for you there once I talk a little bit more closely with the team. How important is HTTPS? It's very important. I mean, the transmission of data is something that everybody's concerned about. So being able to securely transmit information is just so important to building a great web ecosystem. I think like this is just an important trend for the web to go, for websites to go, in order to protect everybody's data, protect everybody's information. So I really do believe HTTPS is the future, and a lot of future features will rely on HTTPS as well, because sending notifications or understanding a user's location, we want to safely transmit that information. So if you want to kind of future-proof your website even, HTTPS is something that's very important.
An interesting question through Twitter. Does the web platform you choose make a difference in SEO? Are there different aspects to focus on depending on the platform?
No, like there's no signal that says like this platform's good, this platform's bad. Like we don't pick and choose. It's really about the content on the page. The only thing is maybe some platforms will do things in a weird way, or let's say like going back to technical SEO, if the platform you're using is building the site, it's saying like, oh, let me build your site for you. And they build out a site, but they leave out things like title tags. There's not like a good place to put your title tag or like meta description information or like like structured data or like the images don't have alt tags. Things like that can kind of mess with how Google interprets your site. But in terms of specific platforms, no, I wouldn't say that there's like a specific preferred platform.
And I would say this is also a really important question to ask when you're building a site. I'm without getting into specifics. I'm working with somebody who got involved with a platform that was extremely expensive, and the platform is heavily coded in JavaScript in JavaScript formats that actually are not read very well by Google. So they're in a position right now where they can't back out of that, and they're stuck in that scenario. And it's really impacting their SEO substantially. So definitely talking and looking at the platform's SEO capabilities ahead of time is a really big thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point.
One last question, an interesting one that we'll kind of end on. If a website has a manual action and then it's cleaned up, do you track whether they've had manual actions in the past and apply that to future manual actions?
Generally, no. If we see like a pattern of abusive behavior, so for example, um, let's say a site. This is a tactic that a lot of spammers will kind of use, where they know there's a good version of their site and a bad version of their site. So they'll say, okay, here's the good version. Let me just put up the good version, get a reconsideration request cleaned up, and then come back and put up all the bad content. And then we discover it again. And we see, oh, like this is the same site. And you've been doing the same thing like 4 or 5 times, 10 times, 12 times. Like, over time we'll start recognizing those patterns. And that's when we'll say, like, look, this site is obviously being manipulative. They're obviously doing some stuff that's not good. There's like 100 considerations to have when we do this. And again, we don't take this lightly. We're not just like, oh, the site, because we know sites can change owners. They can, maybe someone else that's good actually bought up the site and is actually just making good content now. That doesn't mean like forever that site is, will have a manual action on it. But we do see that type of manipulative behavior when people switch on good content, bad content over and over again. And that's when we'll have to make a consideration on whether or not that reconsideration request is accepted that next time. Generally, this shouldn't happen. Hopefully, it's not happening. You don't have a site where it's just like flipping on manual actions on and off, because that might indicate that you're doing something incorrect with your website.
So I want to ask you one more question, and that's you have obviously the things that you're working on at Google, but Google has a lot of projects, and you guys get exposure to a lot of the other projects and discussions. What is it that's happening right now? What projects are happening right now, if you can pick one that really excites you, something that's really interesting to you?
Within search or outside of search?
It can be either or.
Within search, I think the AMP project is super interesting. We didn't talk too much about AMP today, but AMP is inherently interesting to me because it's trying to provide content for people more quickly. I did some research a while back about like this state of internet speeds just in North America, and we rank like pretty low in terms of like global, in terms of the world. And so I've noticed it too. When I'm on my phone and a page loads slowly, that's so frustrating to me. Like I want content. So projects like AMP, not only just for my sake, but across the globe, trying to get people faster lighter data heavy access to information is super exciting to me. So that's in terms of search. Outside of Google, I mean, we're doing crazy stuff every day. I'm really looking forward to the self-driving cars. I cannot wait for the day that I don't have to be paying attention while I'm sitting in traffic, and I could be loading fast AMP pages on my on my car ride and learning about stuff while I'm driving.
Awesome. Well, I want to say it was a really fun webinar. I really enjoyed the presentation. I really appreciate you being a good sport with all the questions. I know sometimes it's hard, with all of the questions about manual actions, but I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of really address each one. And I really think, everybody got some good information. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the information.
Thank you, everyone.